Okay, so welcome back to this another tutorial, and this one is based on handling exceptions. And we know that it's actually in PL Sql we're supposed to understand how to handle exceptions or handling exceptions. So I can say handling exceptions in PL Sql. So we want to talk about how to handle exceptions. Now, the first question here, what is an exception? We all know that when you talk about exception for this case, exceptions is not a new word, it's not a vocabulary, it's not a word to scare, but it's about an errors or error that usually occur when we try to execute any select statement or any DML. So once we encounter that, once we encounter an error, they're referred to as exceptions. So how can the system handle these exceptions, or how can we handle these exceptions in PL Sql? So in this case, remember, or in PL's, so that is in PL Sql. So what happens is, when we are handling these exceptions, we are supposed to understand from what perspective are we handling these exceptions, because you see there are some different types or different ways on how these exceptions are handled. For example, the first one, we have those exceptions that are being handled by the system automatically, and these are referred to as implicit. So if you remember, we are still encountering the same word, the implicit and explicit. Remember in the previous video, we talked about the explicit cases, implicit cases. Here we are talking about implicit exceptions, explicit exceptions. So what do we mean? For implicit exceptions or for implicit errors, these are errors that are always being captured by the system automatically. And these errors are always associated by two things. One is the error message, and secondly is the error code. The error message and the error code. And again, the same thing happens on the explicit cases, where you're supposed to apply or supply the error message and the error code. So how can we handle these exceptions? So when we talk about, or what we mean by saying an exception, just know that an exception is an error in PL Sql that is raised during the execution of a block. So whenever you are executing a PL Sql block and encountered an error, that means the error has been raised by the system, and now it depends whether has been raised implicitly or has been raised explicitly. So that is exactly what this topic is all about. Now, so by doing so, you see, when we talk about a block always terminates when an exception is raised, or when a block or the PL Sql block raises an exception. And this exception can be specified by the exception handler, which perform the final actions before the block ends. So if you remember very well how we did it, so CSR. So if you remember very well that we talked about, like, we have the declare, we have the begin, we have the exception, and then we have the end. You see, these are the four sections of a PL Sql block: the declare section, the begin section, the exception section, and then the end section. So by doing this, you'll find that the exception part is where the errors has to be captured before the block terminates. So here it means that if we are to apply these exceptions, then we're supposed to apply it in different ways. Now, talking about the three categories of exceptions handling. Number one, we have something called the predefined. The predefined. It's a Oracle server exceptions, and I'll discuss probably just to mention some few. Now, if I can just mention it so that we can move. You see, whenever you're trying to bring up or to return to multiple rows at some point. Or at some point, you're trying to divide a value by a 0. Or at some point, you're trying to display some records which even do not exist. You see, those errors that are being caused are referred to as the predefined Oracle Server exceptions or errors. You see, I want you to look at this term as errors or error. So it means that for this particular error information you're talking about, or error we're talking about, the system will automatically assign a value for this. The system will automatically assign a value for this. At the same time, assign a particular code, which is actually called the error code. Which is actually called the error code in line with the message, that is being given. So what happens is, if you're to come up with any error, let's say for example yourself, it means that you're supposed to define it as a user. You're supposed to define it as a user. But in this case, if you're to allow the system to define the error for you, of course, automatically that is something that happens, that the system will always give you a message for an error, of course, with an error code, even before you identifying that error. These errors are referred to as the predefined Oracle Server exceptions or error. And for example, you may find some errors like giving you a message like too many rows, too many underscore rows, no underscore data underscore found, you see. And again, you can have like a 0 divide. So we have so many, Now, that brings us to the second one. The second one is called non-predefined. Predefined Oracle Server exceptions. Now, this again refers to the exceptions. Remember, they are being performed or they're being done by the system alone. It's actually the system that raises these two errors. So they are implicitly being done. So here again, you find that we have the error codes, but we do not have like the associated name or the associated message. So we need to come up with our own name to attach to an already existing SQL code for it to become unique. So that is another one. And then the last one now is the user-defined exceptions. So this means that it is actually you as a user who is supposed to bring up this, to come up or to declare it explicitly, So there are actually two methods for raising an exception. There are two methods for raising an exception. And if you look at the two, if I combine the predefined and non-predefined, these act as one, and then we have the user-defined, which is actually the two. So number one is that an Oracle error occurs and the associated exception is raised automatically. That means it's being done by the system automatically, that is implicitly. For example, we may end up having an error code like Ora-01403. And I think you've been seeing such messages whenever you encounter an error, like Ora hyphen, we can have 01, let's say 403. And for this one is a type of error which occurs when no rows are retrieved from the database. And you'll find that it's always attached to this message, no data found. So these are errors. So these errors are converted into predefined exceptions. Now, we also have another one. Depending on the business functionality your program implements, you may have to explicitly raise an exception. You see, you may have to explicitly raise an exception. So that is the second part. And you can raise an exception explicitly by issuing the raise statement in the block. So we have a term to be used, and the raised exception may be either user-defined or predefined. So just note the two methods for raising an exception, that you're able to raise it implicitly or raise it explicitly. So what happens here is that if I can just type a simple statement here, let's say declare, and for this one, I want to have, let's say f name, or let's just have a simple one like L name. Let's have like voucher 220. Let me begin. Now let me select, okay, let's have like last name into L name from employees. First underscore name equals to, let's have like John. Now let me bring dbms underscore output underscore line into bracket. Then I can just have like John. Okay, let's have like L name. So we are looking for the last name for John. We are looking for the last name of John. So what happens if I end up, look at that, look at this one, look at this. So when we talk about handling exceptions, we are trying to understand how can we handle such exceptions. So if you can look keenly at it, we have the order like 01422, order 06512. But now here we have the error code and here we have the error message. So here we are talking about exact fetch returns more than requested number of rows. And what happens if I can just come select last name from employees where first underscore name equals to, let's say John. What is wrong? Look at that. So it means that for this case, we are unable to retrieve the last name for an employee whose name is John or whose first name is John, because we're using a block. In this case, we have an error because you cannot actually use this block to retrieve all the last names of all the people whose first name is John. So if we go directly with the SQL statement, then you realize that we have more than one John appearing. We have John Chen, John Russell, and John Sale. And this means that the block tried to retrieve the last name of John. So here we have an error. Here we have an error. So how can we trap this error? After identifying or understanding the error we're talking about, how can we trap, especially given the example, how can we trap this type of error? How can we trap this type of error? So when you're trying to capture errors now or to handle errors, we are using the term trapping. So we have two terms here we have to understand. For example, we have trapping and exception. Trapping and exception. And then we also have another one, which is actually propagating an exception. So what is the differences between the two words? What is the differences between the two words? Now, let me explain. Trapping and exception. Both of them actually are meant to handle the exceptions. But when you talk about trapping and exception, this means that in the exception section in your program, if the exception is raised in the executable section of the block, processing branches to the corresponding exception handler in the exception section of the block, then the PL SQL automatically handles the exception, and the exception does not propagate to the enclosing block or to the calling environment. So you see, we have the issue of using the loops. If you remember the first time, I think the second of that block we executed where we were able to use the loops. You see, without the loops, it will execute and give us only one row. But if we apply the loop, then it means that the system will not terminate until all the rows are returned. So without now capturing the loop or without having the loops, then the propagating an exception means that the block will terminate with failure and the exception is propagated to an enclosing block or to the calling environment. So these are the two keywords that we may be using, but at least just understand the trapping and the propagating. So for exception handling, we need to include the exception keyword. So here we are introducing now the exception keyword, and this is how, if you remember the first code, we did not have any exception. So we need now to see how can we handle the same code. So if I type ed, okay, I think it's already gone. So I think for this one, let me guess CLCSR. So let me declare. And then we can repeat the same thing, lname, varchar 20. Then we have begin. Then we have select last underscore name into lname from employees, where first underscore name, equals to John. Then from there we can just have, I think, DBMS. Okay, DBMS, we can have that. Then from there we need now to introduce the exception. This is the first time we're using it. So we can say when 2 underscore many underscore rows, then do what? Then we need to have a message here. Then we can say your, or you select, okay, your selected statement retrieved multiple rows. Consider using a cursor. So if you all know that, okay, let me just put that. So look at this. The error has been captured. The error has been captured, and here it is clean. Our area is clean. You see, compared to the other one. If I can just do the other one, we were not having even the exception part. You see, the other one, we were not having the exception. Sorry, yeah, we were not having the exception part. If I can do that, press enter, look at that. So here we are having a clean statement. But here we were having like dummy data. So for you to capture this exception, then you're supposed to apply what we've done. And this is by using what? Exception. This is by using exception. And they say when too many rows. Remember, too many rows is an implicit cursor. It's actually a predefined exception. It's a predefined exception. And then, of course, we can just put, let me copy this. And you can attach your own message. Like here, you can just say, let's say too many rows, try use cursor. So that is it. Yeah, too many rows, try use a cursor, because we know that if we are to use a cursor, then automatically we're able to capture all the data. So here we are not talking about the implementation or how can we capture this information. Remember, already I've done that in explicit cursors. Here we are talking about exceptions. So we need to see how can we capture this message that it's being understood by the use of the system, So that is one way. So when it comes to the exception types, we have the predefined Oracle server errors, if you remember, or exceptions. We have the non-predefined Oracle server errors. We also have the user-defined errors. Now, let's see, probably let me think about, So when we apply the exception, here, so the only surest way to capture or to trap these errors is to use the exception keyword. So first of all, you're supposed to begin the exception handling section. This is referred to as the exception handling section. And how do you begin it? We begin it with an exception keyword. Then you're supposed to define several exception handlers. So exception handlers is this: when too many rows, when two, you see, we can have as many as we have, or as we can. So we have too many rows, we have too many data. For example, let me change this. We know that when we talk about capturing this information about John, we end up having too many rows. Now let me increase the handlers. So again, you can just say when no data found. Then, so I can still type this, copy, and we paste down here. And this time down, we can say no data found. Let me increase another exception handler. Let's say when others, this is the final now, when others, then. When others, then, let's say it's an error. So you see, when others, it's an error. So what happens is, here we know that if we are to look for if we are to go by this error statement, then automatically we will end up getting the first one for too many rows. And this will give us the information of the statement: too many rows, try use cursor. Too many rows, try use cursor. Now I want this no data found. Let me put somebody like Fred. Is Fred within the database? Let's see. Let me save. Then put that and press enter. Look at that. No data found. No data found. So when we look at this point, all these are referred to as the exception handlers. These are referred to as exception handlers. Now we also have the others. When others. So if you're to place others clause after all other exception handling clauses, then it means that you want to capture anything that is not part or that is not well captured within or by the handler, the exception handlers that you've mentioned. And you can have only one others clause. So you cannot have like more than one. So let's have a look at the non-predefined, because I know this one now is so direct, especially for the predefined, it's so direct. And it's up to you just to key in the values. So for the predefined, okay, so we are talking now about the non-predefined, and the example given, for example, this one already, if I can just get rid of this point and then change this one to John. Now this one is a predefined. This one is a predefined exception. Why? Because I'm using one of its attributes, the two _many_rows. It's a predefined exception. So take that or take note of that. Now I want us to do the non-predefined Oracle server header. This time round, we want to apply something else, because as we move down to non-predefined to user-defined, we are using some reserved keywords. And these keywords are very important. So when you want to create exceptions with the standard Oracle errors by using or the non-predefined, you're supposed to use a value or a name. The name or the keyword here is pragma, then exception underscore init. Pragma space exception underscore init. So this is automatically a non-predefined Oracle server error, how it is captured or how it is trapped. So here I want us to do one example. So if you want to trap a non-predefined Oracle server error by declaring, or if you want to trap that, you're supposed to declare it first. And declaring it first, or declaring it, means that the exception is going to be raised explicitly, not explicitly, but implicitly. It's going to be raised by the system. So when you apply this term, the pragma space exception underscore init, this term tells the system, this term underscore init, this term tells the system or tells the compiler within the system to associate an exception name with an Oracle or with an Oracle error code or the Oracle SQL code. So we always have an error code. And this enables you to refer to any internal exception by name to a right specific handler for it. So automatically we do not have a name, but we have the error code. Get this right for me. We do not have a name for that particular error, but we have the code generated. So how can we associate the name with the code? For predefined, we have the name and then we have the code. So no problems in there, because you see, for example, here we have the 2 main rows. So already we have a code for this and we have a name. So for the non-predefined, we do not have anything. So how can we bring up this? So let's have it by example. So I'll just declare, and then I need to have a name. Let's say my except. This one is the name. My except is the name of my exception, and then exception. This is how we start it. And then I will introduce the pragma space exception underscore init. Now, this is the name. This is our name, which is not there within the system. So I need to associate this name, my space except, and then associate it with the error code. So the error code here is, let's say 01 400. You see? So in this case, if I can just scroll up and see what, okay, let me just have it. Okay, let me just type it so that we can see. Now let's begin. So it means that for this code exists, but this name does not exist. So the work here is to assign a name or associate the name to the code, to the error code. Then, and this error code is all about inserts. You see, this error code is all about inserts. So I think what I will do, I will just first of all create this error. Let me just show you how this error comes into play. Now, let me say drop table, I don't know, or let me create a table. Create table. Let me create table. We can have any name. Let's say I want to take disease. Let's say I want to take note of the diseases and their symptoms. So here I will talk about, let's say the ID, that is the disease ID number. I'll just put it 10. And then I will just have the name of the disease. I can just put voucher 220. And I want to force this column. I want to force this column to have a value. So I will put what? Not null. Press enter. You see the table created. If I describe disease, you can see that this name section, it is mandatory for you to put a value. It is mandatory for you to put a value. Now, when we come in simple terms, you see, if I want to come and insert some values using now, let's say using PL Sql block, I can just come direct and say insert into, let's say this is values, Remember, yes, in the declaration section, I don't have any variable declared, but still I can work with this. Just declare begin. So let me put 1 as the name of the disease, and then let's say COVID. That is number 1. Then I can repeat the same thing. This time round, I want to ignore this and say null. You see, I want to ensure that this part for the second row, I don't have the name of the disease. But remember, this particular column means I am forced to have a name. Let's see what will happen. Then from there, I will just have what? Let me put even an exception. You see, let me put an exception. Or let me just end it there, put that and press enter. Look at that. So what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to show you where I got this message. This number 01400 cannot insert null, So how can we make sure that this information of this line is okay for us? Or it's actually, instead of having all this error, why can we assign or associate a message to this particular code? And that is what I want us to do. So let me just declare again. So I'll just say my except, and then exception, and then have pragma exception underscore init into bracket. Then I'll say my except. So remember, this is the name of the exception, and then I'll have 01400. Then from there we begin. So here I'll just say insert again, insert into disease. Let me just do this. Yeah, insert into disease. Let's say that is the first value. You see, I can have multiple. I can bring up the multiple values. Let me have the second one. Okay. Yeah, so this one is for the null. So it means that the first one, the values are going to be entered correctly. The second one, the first is going to be entered, but this one now, there's an error here. The error is coming from this point. That's why we're talking about cannot insert null. And now you know the reason why I have null. It's because that column is not allowed to be kept empty. You must have a value in. Then from there, let's have the exception. So when my, because this one is my name now, when except, then I'll just have dbms underscore output dot put underscore line into bracket. Then let me just have cannot insert null values. See, cannot insert null value. And then I will end there. Look at that. The message now is very clear. Cannot insert null values. Compared to this one. So this one we have a very wide, a lot of errors, but in this case it's not clear enough on how we can go about. So cannot insert null values is the right keyword here. Cannot insert null values, just with the sake of the non-predefined. So as you see, we have values that exist, the error codes, but statements or names have not been associated to them. So the only way you can do is just to use the predefined. And by using predefined, you're supposed to use the pragma exception underscore init so that you can qualify to now have that. And of course, this gives you a platform now. After having this concept, this now gives you a platform to explore more because we have a lot of info that comes. So always, you can change this name the way you want, but once you change it, ensure you associate it here and put it here whenever you want to do that. We also have something here. Let me have this term here. We have the functions. We have some two terms here. We have something called, let's say, SQLERRM. Okay, let me go back. So more or less, I don't have this simple within my laptop. I don't know. So let me just put that and then just type SQLERRM. And then again, I can just copy the whole thing. So we have some functions here. I want to explain it what it is. This one again is code. Now this acts as the message, but this one is the actualization. So if I save it, now look at this. So cannot insert null values. This is the exact name. We've actually customized it using the problem exception init. The SQL error management. This one will automatically give you what is being written down by the system. The error 01400 cannot insert null values. This one is the, and then of course the SQL code. This one is going to give you the code of the error, the code of the error. So those are the functions. So those are the two different functions that needs to be taken care of. So for the functions, when you talk about SQLERRM, this means what? So this one actually returns. So let me just write in caps, returns character data containing the message associated with the error number, you see. Then when it comes to the SQL code, returns the numeric value, for the error code. So it means that you can assign it to a number variable. So this one means it will give you. So this is the difference that I referred to as. They refer to as the functions for trapping exceptions. So if you want to trap it, then that is how you do it. And that is just a single example on how to use a predefined exception. So you have to explore more on that. Now, let me bring you to the last one, which is actually the user-defined exception. So we have some keywords, especially the pragma exception _init, which is found within the non-predefined exceptions. It is still captured here on the user-defined exception. It is still being captured here. So PL SQL actually enables you to define your own exceptions depending on the requirements of your application. So this is like a freedom to you now to define, apart from what you're restricted by the system, especially for the predefined and the non-predefined. Here you have a freedom of declaring your own what, or defining your own exception. So for example, you may prompt the user to enter a department number, you see, and you may define an exception to deal with error conditions in the input data. You check whether the department number exists. If it does not, you may have to raise the user-defined exception. So you see. Now, for PL SQL exceptions, exceptions must be declared in the declarative section of a PL SQL block. It must be raised explicitly with raise statement. These are like, how can we structure or how can we define the user-defined exceptions? Number one, you're supposed to declare it in the declaration section of a PL SQL block. You're supposed to raise explicitly with raise statement, and then you have to handle it in the exception section. So I want us to see the example, because once we have the example, that is the only point we can now get to understand how the user-defined exception works. Now, so I'm going to have like probably 2 examples, and then we see what happens. So number 1, I'm going to declare, and then I want to have, let's say, department number. I want to check the availability of a department number. And I'm going to declare this variable. At the same time, initialize the variable. Do we have a department number 500? You see, do we have a department number 500? And then I will come to depth name. Here I can just put voucher 220. And then here we can just have it as, let's have a department name, Department name, let's say desk. To assume that site department exists. Then we can now come and create So this one is an exception name. I can just say, let me have it invalid underscore department. This one is the exception name. This one is the exception name, invalid underscore department. Now let's just begin. So I want to update. So I can say update departments. Remember, I've connected to HR. Set, let's say department underscore name equals to depth name. You see, depth name where department ID equals to depth number. So for depth name, here it is, and I've assigned it desk. For depth number, here it is, I've assigned it to 500. So remember, in departments, in our HR database, we have departments, and I don't know whether a department whose department ID is 500 exists. So let's see. So we can say if SQL % not found. Remember, this one is a cursor, but it's actually implicit cursor attribute. So if SQL % not found, then it means that the system, if not found, we want the system to raise this, raise invalid department, which is actually this message, invalid department with a semicolon. And then because an if statement, I have to terminate it. And then I have to commit it because I am updating. So we want the system to, if it finds, then it updates and then it commits. Then let's come to the exception section. So when invalid underscore department, which is actually the exception, then, so we have to raise this. We have to raise DBMS. Then we can have a statement here. You can say no such department, no such department. And then we end. Now, if I press enter, let's see, no such department, no such departments. So this means that this department does not exist. This, the department desk does not exist. The department 500 doesn't exist. Now, if I come back to this, let me first of all do this. Copy, okay, and the okay does not exist. Let's prove the point. Select department name, comma, department ID, comma, department name from departments. So you see, all these are departments. So even if you query where department ID equals to 500, then you can see no rows selected, So what happens if I do this now? Let's give it a department which is okay. Let's call it, we have 270 payroll, 270 payroll. So let's see, 270 payroll. So here I can say it's called payroll, and then the number is 270. 270. Let's save. So we know that this department exists. So if I come here and press enter, now you can see Pl Sql procedure successfully completed. So it means that we've actually done this explicitly by assigning an exception, which is a user-defined exception, and then we are trying to validate or to raise that error in case the error exists. In case the error exists, then we have to raise that. Now, another way of doing that is to use something called the raise. Let's say something referred to as the raise. You see, we've actually managed to use the word raise. But you also have this raise application underscore error. This is another term that can be used. That is another term which can be used, and we can actually make use of this. Now, let me see. We have this scenario that if your age is less than 18 years, you're not allowed to drink. If it's above 18 years, then you're allowed to drink. So I want to bring up that scenario using a user defined. And this time around, I want to use the raise underscore application underscore error. Now we have this term of declaring a variable, except you can just use, let's say var underscore age. See, then you can have a number, or just the age, and this is of number data type. Then you can write prompt, and then you can say, what is your age? What is your age? Now for this one to prompt us to enter a value, this value will remain, especially in the next block, or it will be used in the next block. So I want to put this, I want to put 23. So it is beyond, it's not below 23. It is not below 23 years. So it means that if we are to go with the condition that your age is less than 18, you're not allowed to drink. For this particular person, he will be allowed to drink. So if I press enter, it means that it is already taken into account. Then let me declare, I want to have age, it's a number, and then we assign equals to this value, and then age. So automatically for this one goes directly to this. It will take that as it will take this value, which is actually 23. Then from there, I will begin. Then I will have the condition if age is less than 18. If age is less than 18, then what? Then we're supposed to raise application underscore error. And then here we are supposed to assign, let me assign a value here. Let's say 2008. Then I say, you should be 18 and above for the drinks. You should be 18 and above for the drinks. And then I will end if. And then I will just bring the DBMS. So for DBMS here, I will have to state, let's say, sure, what would you like to take? So this means that what happens if the condition is not true, then this question will be posed to you. But if the condition is true or not true, then we should have an exception here. So the exception is when others, then. So we'll have the again. So we want this to generate the error code. So you can say M, even without This one is a keyword. So I will come to say end, and let's see what happens. So remember, we assigned a name, which is 23. And here we are talking about the condition if age is less than 18, which of course, 23 is not less than 18. So if it's above 18, we expect you to be allowed to take the drinks. So sure, what would you like to take? If I press enter, you see, sure, what would you like to take? Because you've assigned what? 23. 23 was assigned. What happens if 23 is not assigned? Let me just do this. Let me copy this, copy. Okay. Now, what happens if it was not assigned? So I will go back to this, accept, enter. Let me put that in. And then ed. Okay. Let me save. And then do that. Put that and press enter. This time round, you should be 18 and above for the drinks. You should be 18 and above for the drink. So at this point, you'll find that when we are referring it to handling exceptions, or what we refer about, or when we talk about exceptions in Pl Sql or in Oracle database, we're talking about the errors that are being captured. And how can we capture? They're being handled by something called the exception handlers. And this is where now the execution point or the execution section of the Pl Sql block comes into play. So just to know that when it comes to the exceptions, we have the predefined exceptions, we have the non-predefined exceptions, and then we have the user-defined exceptions. So here we are not all about executing the code successfully, but we want to understand now how can we execute if in case there's an error. How can we capture that error such that the user of the system is able to understand and the user of the system again is able to read in between the lines rather than seeing the error, the complicated notifications that are being posted as errors. And that marks the end of this particular chapter, which is handling exceptions. So the next tutorial is about stored procedures, functions, packages, and the rest. So thank you, and see you in the next video.